right, we are back for another episode of Beyond Barriers. Beyond Barriers is a conversation with leaders and community evangelists to join in a conversation around how to navigate an effective accessibility strategy. During these episodes, guests get to share their successes and setbacks of how they've overcome specific issues that could have otherwise ended their accessibility journey. So today, I'm really excited to be joined by Kavitha. Kavitha, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about myself. I'm a UX writer by profession, but I'm also very passionate about the accessibility space ever since I was introduced to it. So I've been working on the space since 2015. I am currently a UX writer, but earlier in my previous role, I was an editor where I deep dived a little bit into accessibility, where in my previous organization, we were working with a lot of publishers in the education industry, major publishers. And my introduction to accessibility has been when one of the publishers decided to get more serious about accessibility and making their products accessible. So we used to create a lot of supplements, guides, PowerPoints, etc. that comes with the textbooks for K-12 and above grades. So I was the quality specialist for some of these products. So I was the last eye to make sure that everything was perfect and everything is accessible. So initially we used to use the inbuilt Microsoft accessibility checker to make sure, okay, this passes the check. So this product or this particular document is accessible. And then over time, when the clients realize that that is not enough, and this is not, some of these documents cannot be actually used by some of their customers, that is when we understood that there is a lot more to accessibility than just making sure that some of those inbuilt checkers say that, okay, this document is accessible. So that is how I got into accessibility. And ever since, I've never been able to take a step back. I've always learning new things, trying to understand where else could accessibility be fit in our lives, and more such things.
So you got to go back to the beginning and explain to me, how does UX, user experience, fit into writing?
So you see all those texts that you see in any screens, right? So I'm responsible for making sure that that text is in line with the design, and the users who are going to experience that particular screen or a particular portal or whatever product you're building are able to navigate through that portal or the product easily and without any confusion. And it also ensures that anybody who's coming to that particular website or a product doesn't get stuck anywhere, basically. So,
Yeah.
and I'm also responsible for writing all the error messages or information messaging, all of that stuff.
I equate this to providing proper or good contextual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what are the disciplines or the principles, I think is probably a better word, of good UX writing?
It should be short. It should be simple, brief, should be comprehensible by anybody who's using the product. It should just state what it is about. So anybody who's basically, if you're trying to create a profile, for example, in Facebook, you should be able to do that in just one click, or so you know what is being asked for. So you gotta input your name, first name, last name, your email or your contact, and then you click on register. Then you should be able to navigate to the next page or the next step in the process. You shouldn't get stuck anywhere. So that is how easy you make it to be. That is one of the part is the design. The designers work on it, but equally important is the content that comes with the design.
So many brands that I speak to, and it's interesting, the UX of a product
Mm-hmm.
and the product design and how that interfaces with the user experience of the contextual explanations that are provided, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the e-commerce space, I think is one specific area, we see a lot of, let's just pull through our product description or our product information
Mm-hmm.
from our PIM, right? Our product information management system, and we'll just plug that in. But I'm hearing from you, there's a lot more to just pulling through data from another system that goes into creating a cohesive, understandable experience.
That is correct. Yeah. So, I would say if you go to Amazon, for example, or any other e-commerce website, so when you click on, let's say, add to cart, and you want to make sure, let's say if you're somebody who's using that experience for the first time, right? You're worried that what happens once you click add to cart, that particular button, like, does it go through? Like, is there in another step where you are going to review it? Do you really want this product? Do you want to add that thing to cart, or do you want to buy it now? There are two buttons, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do, or what the next step is going to be. So those kind of things are very important to the users. Like, so when we are building a design, we know where we are coming from. So you are deciding, okay, so there is a product, and then I have written the header for the product. Okay, it's going to be this mobile phone, and we are adding all the descriptions, all the specifications. And now what does the user do? So they're going to read all of these, and we want them to buy, and we want them to, for them to buy, they need to analyze all the information, and then they got to click some of those buttons. So, but what should those buttons say? Like, how informative and how easy is it to understand for the user, for you to be able to make them a customer, from a potential customer, basically. So that is very important, and that is where the UX writing comes in. So earlier, this was something that was done by either the developers or the UX designers themselves. But lately, people have realized that there is more to the content than just writing something. For example, error messages. It would just say something went wrong, and you wouldn't know where it was wrong, what was broken in a particular series of events or in a process. You get stuck and you just don't know, and then you have to start the process again, right? So those are some of the places where the UX writers bring value in.
How are you studying the behavior or the patterns and the maybe the pitfalls of a flow?
So I currently haven't been working on any of the consumer products. I work for a portal that is B2B. So there, we kind of do usability testings for
Yeah.
most, after each prototype is released, basically. So we kind of gain some feedback from them and try to understand where what is wrong or what could be improved for ease of accessibility and ease of use for them. So there are some places where we overlook things, like when we are building a product, we have our own jargons, we have our own terms to describe some of these things, which might not be familiar to the users for using it. So so we gain a lot of knowledge from usability testing from that perspective, and then we try to incorporate their feedback, and then try to and the interesting thing about usability testing is that you tend to figure out stuff that you would have never thought of. You would have thought, okay, this is fairly a simple process. It's like step 1 to 5. And like, there's no way somebody can get stuck there. And then we've seen instances where it's like fairly simple explanations or text or buttons. And then the users are like, this is confusing. Like, how do you go about it? What does this mean? Like, is this, so once we click here, is it going to take me to the last step, or is it going to take me to the next step? Like, so there could be some conditions where you skip a particular step, right? So those kind of things. So that is how we try to understand the pitfalls, or like where the gap is, and try to bridge it.
It's um full transparency.
Yeah.
You're the first in the since we launched our podcast over 6 months ago. We started incubating this. The
Mm-hmm.
first UX writer that's come to speak, and just um the depth to which you can look at text through the user experience lens is such a deeper angle than most brands that we talk to in the enterprise space,
Mm-hmm.
household names. Because your point about, well, something went wrong, it's like that's not going to fail on a YCAG rule perspective. There's a value input there,
Right.
but the contextual understanding, and I guess I want to transition, and maybe I don't know if it's controversial or not, but like, isn't AI replacing alt text writing?
Kind of, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what AI has done to help or hurt the case of user experience and the alt text focus that you have.
So there's already a lot of automated versions of all text. And
Yeah.
also, if you look at the live captions, for example, right? So most of these are AI generated these days. And uh, one of the major things that affects me personally is that it's still not at the point where it's actually usable by some of these people who really want to use it. So there are so many mistakes. For example, somebody like me who's from India with some accent, uh, a lot of words are not picked up correct, and it's okay if 10% of it goes wrong, but then like when it goes to change the whole meaning of the thing, it kind of becomes very difficult for people to understand. And when it comes to alt text writing, there's already if you look at PowerPoints, Microsoft PowerPoints, they have an inbuilt accessibility, sorry, alt text generator. So if you input
Yeah.
an image, there's a default alt text that pops up already. But if you look at them, like, it's no way helpful for the user. So if you input a graph, it will just say this is a graph, and then probably might even like pick up a few values that it can scan, but it is of no value to the users who's actually using an alt text to understand what the image is about, right? So I have in my experience written like hundreds and thousands of alt text in different forms and fashions for different types of images, graphs and plots, and also for some animations, and also have written a bit of audio descriptions in some places. So in all those cases, like, there's so much more to it than just how you're describing a picture. It also depends on the context. For example, if you're just adding a graph with let's say you're talking about your company's sales report, for example. So in that case, like, how much do you want the description to be? Like, do you really want the person to know that this is just a sales report, or do you want them to know, the whoever is using that particular graph, to know what the values are? Like, what was your sales? How did it go? What was your sales last year? All of those things. And that is where the AI lacks at this point. Maybe it'll get improved over time, but right now, that is one of the major challenges that the AI is facing, I would say, from my experience. And I have
Yeah.
actually worked with, in my previous role, have worked a little bit with some of these folks who are trying to create who are starting up. And but before I could contribute much, I had quit that job and had moved on.
Yeah. It's been eye-opening to hear from you we've inserted alt text, or we're using image recognition from Amazon or Azure or whatever, but that contextual "how did I get here, where am I going" aspect is not accounted for
That's
at
right.
all.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges you've seen scaling strategy across an organization?
So one of the things is, so I have always been working with service companies. So one of the major challenges that we face is to get the client buy-in on how something should be, especially from an accessibility point of view. So the clients say we want the product to be accessible, but to what depth? Do they want it? To how serious are they? Are they just trying to meet the litigational part of it? I just want to make sure that they are not liable legally, or do you
Yeah.
really want your product to be accessible? Right. So that is a big challenge. So in my previous role, like I said, like when I dived into accessibility, that particular client was very serious about it. They wanted to make all their products accessible, and they actually sent us, so they were also new to this, so they sent us a 60 slide PPT to understand, like, these are the things that we want, and we want you to learn this and interpret it and then apply it and implement it to the all this. So I was majorly working on PowerPoints at that point. So we had to look at each slide manually. We have to make sure that the template was fine. There were like n number of things that you need to check to make sure that one slide is accessible. It's not just the color contrast and then the font color, font size, and then you also have a lot of other formatting issues. So these are not things that people are generally familiar with, right? So in my current role, in one of my clients also wanted accessibility, but the thing is, when we dive a little deep into it, sometimes they don't understand, like, okay, why should we change this font size? Like, this kind of makes it look good. This is part of the design. The design looks better with this particular font color or font size. And it's also, when you have a big table, like, it's very difficult to increase the font size of the headers because you want it to look good, right? But so those are but then there are people who really can't see some of those things. Like, some people with some kind of visual impairment might not be able to really read it, and also the text when it comes to it, right? So the headers of a particular table should all be independently understood by each of us, right? So when somebody is using an assistive device, that becomes very difficult for them. So these are some of the challenges that we face currently, because they don't understand the depth of it when they're getting into it.
I guess, yeah, I mean, that how serious is a brand statement? What's the path forward if they're not serious at all, right? Like, I guess it's inspiring or helpful to have someone bring to you 60 pages of best practices, but how do you overcome the barrier when someone's not serious?
Yeah, so you have to evangelize. You don't have a choice, like, because you're passionate about it. You just tell them that, this is, so for example, so in some cases, what happens is, like, there are a big chunk of their customers who really need it. And so that helps. So
Yeah.
in my case, what happened is, in one of the projects I worked, like, so we found out that some of the users who participated in the usability testing actually found some of these things very difficult to navigate. So there was one particular instance where, so there was a design, so you are making a payment in a portal, and once the payment is done, it has a success message. It says, so your payment is done, it's successful or something, and it ends there. And there was no other navigation beneath it. So what happens is, like, if you're using a screen reader or any other kind of assistive device, how it reads is, for example, if you're using a JAWS reader or an NVDA reader, it first reads all the main menu, and then it kind of like goes with that information architecture. And once they read the success message, it stops there. It's like the page is ended, and then it directly goes to the footer, right? So if I'm using that, like, when I visualize it, I can see that I'm going to get stuck there because there's nothing beneath it. Or I have to think, okay, so I'm here now, I have to go back to the main menu. So I have to go to main menu and then click there and then go to the home page. But whereas if I am someone who can see it, I'm just going to close the window, or I'm just going to go click on some other link that is there, right? So that's again something actually that popped up in one of the usability testing. And I pointed out that, like, this is an accessibility issue. And then the client was like, this is also a design issue, right? It's just part of a good design. So any good design is just gonna be gonna make the accessibility part of it.
That's what I was going to ask is there a correlation between text or good UX on the writing side of your application, your product, your digital content, and the overall design or functionality of the app, right? Like, is there a correlation between the two that you find?
Yeah, definitely. So if the design is good, by default the text can be made good, right? And also what happens is, when you have really good designers, they're open to new suggestions. Like, if you tell them, like, even you don't even have to use the word accessibility, you just tell them that, like, this is a problem and people might get stuck, and they're like, oh, okay, if that's a possibility, I can change it this way, I can change it to something like this, or maybe we can change the whole layout here, right?
That's
So
exactly where I was going, is like, if this is a challenge from an accessibility front, and when you're using accessibility solutions, what are the odds that this is a challenge for all of the user personas that the brand has coming to them, right?
That's right. Yeah. So
Um,
I've actually had a sorry actually
no,
had
no.
good I had the opportunity to work with really good designers in my current organization. So they were very open to changes, and they were also like very keen to learn more about accessibility. Once they started seeing the gaps, they were like, oh, okay, so these are the things. So maybe like they'll write down like one or two things, and they're like, next time I'll make sure these are not part of it, and if you see anything more, like just let us know. We'll also try to make sure that the same mistakes are not taken ahead, right? So yeah, so those have been some good uh, pathways to accessibility.
Tell me about some of the setbacks or challenges.
Um, like I said, one of the things is obviously the client buy-in. The other thing is like how how much time and effort or money is being spent, right? So in my previous organization, what happened is, so there were like 3 or 4 clients who wanted the accessibility in all their products, but some of them were not ready to invest so much. So they were like, so we need all text. Uh, Something better than the default alt text that is being presented by the accessibility, sorry, the PowerPoints. But at the same time, we are not ready to spend a lot of money into it. So you have to come up with something short that will explain it, right? And similarly, there are like few templates wherein like they're like, okay, we can make do with these many number of n number of things, but there are like these things that you don't have to worry about. But once you start knowing these things, you know that like those are also some blockers for some of these people. And our final users were actually students who had some kind of disabilities. So we wanted to make sure that we went overboard a little bit and try to squeeze in some of these things where if and ever possible. So those that was one of the major challenges we faced, because there's only so much you can do with the time and effort.
Can you? I want to go back to something you had mentioned, the information architecture, right? Kind of
Hmm.
a fancy word, but break that down in layman's terms for me.
Okay, so you have in a website basically, so we are trying to make the website access. So one thing that most designers do is to make sure that the website is compatible with different models of devices. For example, different
Yeah.
kinds of phone, Android, iPhone, or different operating systems and stuff. Another thing that we look at is to make sure that it is accessible and is compatible with different types of screen readers. So I used to use JAWS and also NVDA sometimes to just check and make sure that it is working fine. So what happens is so these apps, they read the content in a certain order. So
Yeah.
you have to make sure that it is presented in that way. The information, so for example, you have to highlight the headers and then the subheaders and the heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and then you have the main menu, and then you have all the sub menu, and then how do you want to navigate? So when you click on the tab button in your keyboard, like how do you want it to be navigated, right? So that architecture makes a huge difference for people using assistive devices. And similarly, another thing is the display of error messages. Say for example, you're filling a form and there are, say, 10 questions under it, and once you you don't fill anything and you try to, let's say you leave all of it empty and try to go to the next step, it just shows 10 different error messages. This is empty, this is empty, this is empty. So how should it be read? Like how do they understand? Or let's say if there is 10 questions and the user has answered 8 of it, and then the 2 are left out, how do they know which 2 of them have been left out, right? So those are the kind of information hierarchy or information, how it is presented within a page. So that is mostly taken care of by the developers.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
that is an important part of accessibility. So that is something I make sure works by testing it on one of these screen readers.
Yeah, we hear a lot about the accessibility object model and the accessibility tree of a website.
Mm-hmm.
So when you started to talk about the information architecture, I'm like so fixated on this writing component, which is there's such a bigger lens of applying alt text and or I feed my images to a image recognition service and I get it. It's like no, like the logic and flow, and it's sort of like I don't know. As a kid, I got left at the grocery store once, and it's like, do you want to get
Yeah.
hung out when you're trying to go through this flow? And it's like, sorry, we can't add this to the cart. It's like, well, where is it? Did it? Is it like? Is it right?
True.
So
Yeah, and another thing is, the one of the issues with these image recognition softwares is that, like, any image that you input, they're gonna give it's gonna give you an alt text, right? So let's say if you let's go back to the same sales report. Let's say you're
yeah,
creating a presentation, and in the front slide you've added an image of like 5 people like in a meeting room, right? It adds no value to the PowerPoint at all, but then it's gonna add an alt text, 5 people in front of a computer and talking, something like that, right? And somebody who's using the opening the PowerPoint to read about a sales report is listening to an alt text that says, okay, it's an image of 5 people working, and okay, what? So why am I hearing this? Like maybe I opened the wrong document, right? So that's also something that the AI has not been able to fix yet. So I would say at this point, like people need to look at it. Like there's a manual eye, a human eye is
yeah.
needed to make sure that these gaps are filled.
I want to close out with one last question, which is
Mm-hmm.
what are the biggest disruptions coming to the accessibility space?
One is definitely this alt text thing. It's getting better, and I'm very even though these are not perfect, I'm very, very, very amazed at how these live captions are working, and is really helpful to a lot of people currently. And also a lot of devices have come up with their own versions of text to speech converter or speech to text converters, which kind of is getting better every day. And I'm really excited to see what's next in these spaces, especially in the tech space. And with AI being ahead of time, it's kind of going to help us um, make it better and make it more accessible to everybody.
Well, Kavitha, you've shared so much. I always love to wrap up by giving kind of the open mic and forum to share anything or bring up something that we didn't necessarily get to today.
Um, yeah, no, I think we covered most of what I wanted to say and share here. But yeah, I just one thing I would like to really, really hope is that accessibility really becomes part of the design, and like we really do not have to have so much of talking, and like it should just be part of our life, and it should be it should be packed and shouldn't be retrofitted in all of these organization and any of the products that any users are using.
Well, the inspiration and the organic way that you go about it is if it's um, a nudge to anyone who listens to the episode today, it certainly you've given a lot of great insight. So I want to say thank you and
Thank you.
have a great day.
Thank you.